Morning, everyone. It is 10:30. We're just going to hang on for a minute or so, and then we can get started. Thank you. Morning, everybody. Welcome to the SAMED-SALDA Regulatory Forum for June. We do these regulatory forums as an opportunity for people who are outside of the regulatory committee and maybe have an interest in what is happening in the regulatory front for South Africa. So I'd like to welcome you all. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we start. Obviously, you can see on the slide there is a notice about Competition Commission and you know how we must behave in a manner that follows all the anti-competitive laws, and we mustn't do anything in violation of that. Secondly, I would ask everybody to please switch off your videos just to try and help the bandwidth, because often we have quite a lot of members on the meeting. So, you know, sometimes it's a bit disruptive if you have your video on. The other thing is that if you have a question, please keep yourself on mute and put your question in the chat facilities. We will try to get all your questions answered at a time that is suitable during the session. And if not, we can always, if there are a lot of questions and we can't manage in the time, then what we will do is we'll also do follow-ups via correspondence after the meeting. So we have a nice lineup this morning, very topical. We have Dr. Dimakatso Teresa Mathibe, who is the Senior Manager for Medical Devices at SAPRA. She's a relatively new appointee to the team, joining SAPRA in April. And she's going to give us an overview of the amended regulations and also what is actually happening at SAPRA. And she said she would be prepared to hear some of our concerns on the draft regulations. Just bearing in mind that Dr. Mathibe was not part of the drafting of these regulations. So it's something that she is now taking forward, but was not part of the process. Dr. Mathibe does come from the medical technology sector. She's worked in industry. She's worked in regulatory for Adcock Ingram, Medtronic Africa, GE, and Seismics. And as I mentioned, she was appointed to SAPRA in April this year, and this is an opportunity for her to introduce herself to us, overview where we are on the regs, and give us some insights about what is happening at SAPRA. So, Dr. Mathibe, welcome, and please, over to you.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you very much, Madeleine, for the introduction. It's clearly well represented. Thank you very much. And thanks as well for the opportunity to come and join the group and the team. And I'm looking forward to, you know, to our engagement for today as well, the discussions for today, as well as the future engagement. You know, I got a brief from Caroline to prepare the, you know, any presentation related to the regs. And I said to Caroline, it will be a very difficult thing to do because they're still out there for comments, for public comments. For me, I think if it's, so I ask if it's okay for me to say, can we discuss the contentious issues? And then this will be a continuous discussion on the areas that are of concern to the industry, and then we look into that, and then we discuss that. So that was the approach. And then the other thing that I was asked to do was to give an update. So I think I can do that once we have discussed upon your approval, Chair. Just give an update of what's happening in the unit currently, and so I thought I can give an update on that towards the end after we've discussed the regs. But from the regs perspective, I was asking myself, what are the contentious issues that I need to put forward that we can discuss, and then we find way forward. So then it was a situation where I'm not too sure which areas you would like us to focus on. Hence, I said, can we make this an open discussion upon your approval, Chair, and we take it from there.
By all means. I mean, this is a really golden opportunity, guys. We have a new appointee to SAPRA, and I think Dr. Mathibe, because she has worked in regulatory positions in companies, in medical device establishments, I think you are well positioned to understand the point of view of industry. What are the practicalities? What are the things that we trip up on? And I think this comes from a spirit of we want to comply. I think SAPRA must understand that you don't have a hostile stakeholder here. What you have is a group of people who want to help SAPRA fulfill the mandate of patient safety and efficacy. We want to work and operate within the law. We want to work and operate within the regulatory framework and try and follow the guidance documents as far as possible. But I think that, just to kick off the discussion, what I will say is the first point of contact is we cannot countenance anything that is a special requirement for South Africa in the medical device supply chain, which isn't required for safety and efficacy and patient protection in other countries, because we don't want to follow a medicines framework. It's very important to us that we align, simply because quite a huge proportion of the South African health system medical device supply chain comes from imports. And this doesn't mean that we are not taking into consideration the fact that there is a burgeoning manufacturing sector here, and we as SAMED and SALDA certainly welcome any locally manufactured goods, but they're actually distinctly disadvantaged by some of the aspects of this draft regulation. So what we'd really like to see is harmonization to the point where if you have credentials from another jurisdiction, you don't need special labeling, you don't need anything that requires a special supply chain for South Africa, and you certainly don't need additional licensing. I mean, it's very contentious that there is a wholesale license that has appeared in the South African framework. So the reason that the wholesale license is so contentious is because it's not required anywhere else. It is accounted for, the principle of wholesaling is accounted for in the ISO 13485 quality management system. You can have distributor to distributor supply chain as long as it is managed under your quality management system. And yet we still seem to be coming up against a regulatory authority that has a framework that comes from, how they've always regulated medicine. So I'd just like your comment on that maybe to kick off.
Okay, thanks, Madeleine. I think I agree with the first statement that you said, that the intention of this kind of gathering or us sitting together to communicate or discuss or even engage is to indicate that the industry wants to comply. And I think the intention as well is to relay the information, and it's also helpful. I think I appreciate that from my side, that we have organizations or associations that also align to the requirements and assisting the members to ensure that they comply to the requirements. So that point I just wanted to indicate that I'm aware of that. And you spoke about some of the issues. I know there are contentious issues, and I think that's what the approach I thought about, that these are the issues that we put on the table and we iron out. We have to, when we discuss in those points, as you indicated, I could pick up there's 2 points that I've picked up on your communication. It's the supply chain, looking at the wholesaling, issue as well as the label. And those are the points that we need to iron out, but we also have to consider and take in cognition what the Act says now, what is written in our Act, as well as the regs are here now that we need to discuss and link the communication that we will have or discuss to Act 101. So, and I think for me, that was the intention that, guys, I cannot come and say, this is what we do. I wanted to hear what are the issues, and we discuss it based on the requirements, what the requirements are saying, and are the requirements that are being put on the table, the discussions points that are being put on the table, are they aligned to the Act? So for me, this is an opportunity for us to look at the regs before they are finalized, to see any points. The wholesale, I want to be honest with you, Madeleine, we need a full, either a workshop or a full day on this, not even a full day, a time on its own, because a full day it's just overkilling it, but a time on its own to discuss it, and where is it coming from and why is it in our regs.
So honestly, that is such good news, because I think, just to give you some background, and I mean, I know that you've been in the industry yourself for a while, so you kind of have come across workshops that have been done with key stakeholders. And I mean, obviously, as the national regulator for the entire industry, you need to be as inclusive as possible in terms of stakeholder engagement. But what we have found is, in times past, when there have been previous attempts to workshop with industry, we've been very successful in looking at particular clauses, trying to shape the words so that the mandate of the regulator is covered, as well as the practicality of the needs of industry. But it's a little bit of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, because every time we workshop, then typically what has happened in the past is that some time has gone by, and then a draft regulation has come out which doesn't reflect the work that was done in workshops, or the comments are not really taken on board. So, that might be because of the internal processes at the regulator, and also change of staff. And we recognize these challenges, certainly, because it is a massive undertaking to regulate an entire industry, and to do it in a way that satisfies all the stakeholders. But I really would welcome, an opportunity to maybe have a session where we present the industry point of view on a particular point. Maybe we look at the Act, we look at the regs, we look at the guidance, we understand the history behind why it has been laid out that way. We explain to the decision makers, and I think that's also a key point, Dr. Mathibe, if we could have the people that actually can make the decisions about what ends up in those documents in the room, so that it isn't secondhand knowledge being passed on via, the people who are points of contact with the public. And then what we have is a workshop where we can agree some wording that we can all live with. That's, and I mean, obviously, in the ITG group, we also try to find consensus wherever possible. It doesn't mean that industry always agrees and is unanimous about some of the issues, because everybody has their particular corner of the industry where they have particular needs. But the point being is that we actually get to a much better draft document when it has been workshopped with key stakeholders. So, we were really hoping that we would have that opportunity well before the closure of the comments period, so that we can really get some good comments that are taken on board, that are kind of almost pre-ratified by SAPRA. And then we end up with a situation where the regulations are the best possible outcome for industry and for the protection of the public and the workings of the regulator. So that's definitely a welcome development. If you're prepared to host or convene something like that, that would be fantastic. Guys, I'm talking a lot. Does anybody want to put forward some of the things that they're concerned about? I don't see hands. Caroline, can you maybe see hands? Questions?
I don't see hands. I'm popping quickly to the chat to see questions.
All right. Any questions?
I see a question from Francisca.
Francisca, yes.
When do you estimate that the regulation will be implemented?
Dr. Mathibe, can you maybe give us some idea of when we think?
That's the question.
Sorry.
So hence I'm quiet. Okay.
When do you think it would be implemented, the regulation? What do you see as a timetable or a roadmap?
Okay. So we will once the public comment are closed, and I think before I answer that, I actually was writing that, you know, when you're indicating about the workshop that is welcome, and then we can host it. We have only few weeks to the closing of the comment, and I will suggest that we use that. Even we can discuss, but we have to discuss who will be coming to those meetings so that we don't have 100 people that we cannot control the meetings and so we arrange it and we structure it that we are able to get something out of those meetings. So I agree, we can do that. I can look at we host it. We can discuss further as a team, or as now in this meeting, on how can we arrange to have such communication before the closing of the comments. And based on that, from our side, once we receive all the comments, it comes back to us, because it will via the NDOH and come back to us, and then we review it. And that will talk to my structure later when I tell you the update. So I think after closure, let's give it about 6 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can have internal review as well as going to our executives to review it as well.
All right.
Prior to finalization, yeah.
Look, I think in terms of I know there are questions coming in. What I just wanted to say, just to close off your comment, who turns up at the actual workshop to present? I think maybe what we can do. I mean, first of all, we have the internal work stream under the ITG, which has got quite a broad collection of stakeholders, and maybe what we can do is we can ask just one representative from each of those stakeholders to be part of the workshop. So that covers quite a large ambit. It's got local manufacturers, it's got SAMED, which is the sort of body for the industry. It's got SALDA, which has got the IVD people. It's got clinical trials folks, it's got engineers, it's got small businesses, it's got medical imaging. There's a number of inputs from various people. I'm sure I'm forgetting, and of course pharma and people who've got borderline medical devices. So I think it's fairly representative. Of course, we're never going to get a perfect collection of people, but I think that if we take members from the working group, maybe that's the fastest way to get a group going that can actually workshop the regs. That's my suggestion as the chair of the internal working group under ITG for medical devices. So give that some consideration, and if that's satisfactory to you, then we can actually put names forward pretty quickly. All right, more questions. I see here there's one from Tanya. Just a moment, let me just pull up the screen again. Here we are.
Madeline, it's Tanya here.
Yeah, for some reason I can't see the chat. Just a moment.
Madeline, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Tanya.
Maybe if I can just share. Would it not be worthwhile or possible to actually get a workshop with SAPRA where they go through the revised regulations with industry and explain where and why and what has been amended and the rationale for that prior to the deadline for comment, because that will assist industry to then frame its comments appropriately, rather than having a workshop after the deadline when the deadline is passed, essentially.
Okay, so I don't know, Dr. Mathibe, do you have an opinion on that, or can you?
I think, yeah, if Tanya, if direct you, I thought we said we'll have a workshop before. That's what I.
Yes,
Yes,
that's what I thought as well.
Pardon, I heard it was happening after the deadline. Forgive me.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So look, I mean, I think that's incredibly positive. We already have quite a good idea of where the areas are of contention, or certainly areas where we need a bit more clarity. And also remember, if there is a rationale where you know, SAPRA can give us an explanation for why it has been couched in those terms, you know, industry can take that on board and actually listen to the rationale and see how that can be you know, accommodated. But at the same time, we strongly take the approach that we don't want to have special supply chain. And I think that you know more than anybody else, because you've worked for companies that import medical devices. If you have too many special requirements, then what happens is multinationals, certainly, or bigger organizations that maybe have new products, look at the South African health system and the access to it, and they say, you know what, it's not actually worth our while. And it actually has a detrimental effect on giving patients access to products. So this is something that's always in the back of our minds. All right, I have more questions here. How long after the final regulations will call-up start? That's from Francisca.
Okay.
Call-up of products, that's registration of products, yeah?
Yes, yes. That will, you know, at the back, what's happening, we are also doing the guidelines. For example, we're busy doing the fees guidelines so that we cannot publish until the regs are back. So, you know, giving you a timeline to say the call-up will be done, because the fees also still has to go through the NDOH before they can be approved. I think you know the process. So if I say we're gonna be doing call-up after this day, I have the regs for this, the fees for the medical device was not, it's not part of the fees that was published last year, if you look at it. So we have to publish those fees, and then it goes through comments, the whole process as well. And then once that has been done, that's what I'm saying, there's a lot that's happening at the background at the current moment. While the fees are out, we were working on guidelines, how the documents will look like for registration and application. And that's what I thought I would do towards the end. But then I cannot give you a date and say the call out will come out now, because there are other stakeholders that are involved in, for example, approving the fee structures for product registration. But it's something that we're preparing ourselves now for, that when we close this regs, the fees goes out. So we're trying to manage time like that.
All right, fair enough. I think we have a question from Sharika, which talks about, and I don't know, Dr. Mathibe, if you are familiar with this, but basically when the regs came out in 2016, there was a period of 5 years for people to get ISO 13485 or a certified quality management system. Sharika's question is, the ISO 13485 requirement for the renewal of licenses. So our licenses are all coming up for renewal sort of in the 2022 time frame. Do you think industry will receive an extension under the current COVID circumstances? So I don't know if you have any sense of that at the moment.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Madeleine. I think we need to go back and say, as we indicated, we need to work together towards compliance. You know, we cannot bring COVID now. If the organizations were given 5 years to implement the ISO 13485 in their system. So I think for me, the COVID years had an impact because some organizations were not working. But I also want to bring the issue of that organization were given 5 years. COVID came only last year. So if a company got a certificate in 2017, they could have started the process some time ago. With that said, at the back as well, we went back to SANAS to understand what's happening with the caps, and we're still looking into that. It's most companies never even approach. They're only starting now, which was what SANAS indicated, that even the cap started now. And the reason why that is happening is that no company was approaching any caps for that. It's only now when they see that their license is about to expire that they want to be audited for them to have an ISO certificate. And that number of cabs is also increasing application with cabs to SANAS. So it's one issue that we're looking into, and then we will be sharing communication regarding the ISO 13485 certification very soon. This is, what month is this? This is June. So very soon we'll be sharing that. This is one topic we'll discuss in our ITG meeting, which is coming on the 26th or 29th, if I'm not mistaken. But we will be sharing communication, yes, on what is the way forward.
All right.
Definitely.
Okay, so I see that we've got Shivani Hirilal, who had a question specifically about the requirement for distributors and whether they need 13485. And according to Article 14 of the European Medical Device Regulation, there is no obligation for a dealer or distributor to be certified according to ISO 13485. That's an interesting question, Shivani. I don't know if Dr. Mathibe, have you got any sense of whether it will be required for distributors? I imagine because we are medical device establishments under the regs that it would be required. Or what is your take on dealers and distributors?
When looking at the distributor, remember, if you have a distributor, we're still responsible for post-marketing.
Yeah,
so it's yeah, so we still have to have that, and that will be managed by the ISO 13485. You're not the manufacturer, but you're distributing the product, yes. You're managing it. So if there's any post-marketing related issues, we'll have to speak to somebody that you're handling medical devices. Yes, I will answer to that. But it's a good point. I'll look into that article and see the rationale behind the. I'll have to look at that. Into that the section that she's referring to.
Also, remember, medical device regulations are now, you know, they've evolved. So just make sure we're looking at the latest MDR. I think just to set everybody's minds at rest, if you are a small organization with you know, with no quality management system, to actually put in a quality management system, because you need to be doing all of those things anyway. I mean, if you are just a business person in general, if you get customer complaints, you need to have a system to be able to handle those, even if it was just for yourself and your own business, right? So don't be put off by a quality management system. There are principles in that quality management system that you're doing anyway. You just need to formalize it. And yes, we recognize that the conformity assessment bodies are at the moment it's still coming out of the starting blocks, and a lot of the bigger companies have overseas auditors coming in because they're very established. So there is a process, and I hear from Dr. Mathibe that we're going to walk this road together. But don't be put off. Put your quality management system in place. You know, there are certain basics that can easily be put in place, and in fact should have been in place anyway for your license, because if you remember the application form, it asks for some basic elements of the quality management system already. So there's nobody who's got a medical device establishment license that doesn't have certain procedures in place, we assume, if you've been honest in your application. All right, but that is obviously to be followed up. I'm just trying to follow up here. The SAPRA annual performance plan. Oh, sorry. Sorry about this. Okay, the SAPRA annual performance plan for the coming year did not include a schedule for device call-up. Can we then assume no call-ups in this financial year? So Elsabe, who's going to be speaking to us after Dr. Mathibe, thank you very much for joining. And that question, Dr. Mathibe, is, yeah, no. Can we assume no call-ups in the next financial year? Because it wasn't in the performance plan. Does that sound like something familiar?
Yeah, it is familiar, yes. If you're looking at you remember the annual performance plan will have the operational plan, the AOP, annual operational plan that supports it. So if you look at, there's a lot that's happening behind the AOP, the annual performance plan. The call out will be it's part of our internal operational plan. And hence I'm saying, if you look, we are doing the recs. So we cannot indicate on an AOP. And as I'm saying, some of the factors are not dependent only on us. And we still have to do the FIS rec. So yes, the annual plan, as you said, on the system does not call out for call up of medical device, but our annual operational plan has that as part of our operational things. So it will be updated accordingly. Yeah, but that what you're saying is correct. Let me put it that way.
All right, thanks,
Yeah.
Elsabe. I've got a question
And it
from.
will be.
Yeah?
Sorry. It will be communicated. Obviously, we cannot just throw a call-up plan without communicating with the industry.
Thanks very much.
Be a
And
surprise.
I mean, you know that the question comes because people have to do some sort of financial planning around what costs might be associated if their products are called up. So,
yeah,
you know, that's really where that question comes from. Then
yes.
There's a comment from Mia, which says, Kanyisile has been brilliant and absolutely helpful in assisting us with our applications and queries. A recommendation, can the unit set up a dedicated queries email so that we can receive responses quicker? So basically, what I think we as a membership really feel is that it would be, I mean, there's been massive improvement in terms of communicating with the regulator in the recent years, but I think that we need something slightly more systematic and maybe, you know, easier to track performance of responses, and also our points of contact should not change so that people don't have to start from square one, you know, when they've been contacted with the regulator. Now that you're in that organization, could you maybe set up a dedicated queries email or something similar so it makes it easier to interact with industry with clear tracking and response times?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we have initiated a process internally for queries management, and we're going to be also updating because some of the queries that we receive indirectly that are going to, for example, technical team as well as the admin, we are now collecting them, and we want to, so that we minimize the queries that we're receiving. We're trying to collate all of them again, and we're going to update our FAQ very soon. And we also intend to have a query email where people can, so we're working on that now. Definitely.
All right. Thank you very much.
But I will advise, because I will advise that if you have received an application response, let's say from Kanyisile or a technical person, please still communicate with that person, because if you change the direction, then it becomes also very difficult for, you know, Trace who's working on it. So that's one thing we've picked up in our one of the issues, that you start talking to Kanyisile, for argument's sake, because her name is mentioned, but then along the way it goes back to Constance, and Constance does not have the history of your application. Then it gets lost in the mist. It becomes like a new application. So maybe that you can continue and speaking to the person that you're working with, and if you are not getting any joy, you can copy me. So that's what I would advise. Then I can understand what's the issue there.
Okay, Mia, I hope that answered your question. Then I've got another one from Elsabe. Which medical device company licenses are made subject to the company getting specific conditions on their licenses associated with specific products? Does this only apply to COVID-related products? So it's those special conditions on your license that Elsabe is asking the question about.
I'm not too clear about the question. Maybe can also be directed to me? I'm not too clear of what the question is about.
Do you want to unmute and just ask? Yeah.
Yes, I can. So certain companies get asked to submit information that are normally associated with product regulation. So information in relation to safety or performance or the quality of a product, and that then kind of gets reviewed, and the company's license is made subject to that, what I would call a quasi-regulatory review. And I wanted to know, is this only applicable to the COVID products or to any other products as well?
Okay, all right, it's clear. Thank you very much, Elsabe. That was, remember last year with the emergency, on the surge of COVID, there were a lot of applications that were received with some of the, the COVID test kits that coming into the country. And we, as a SAPRA, decided to take a decision to ensure that the products that are coming in are safe. And this is only applicable. Let me just go direct and answer your questions. The conditions are only applicable to COVID-related products, only at this moment, because we haven't done any formal collab. Yes.
Okay.
Can I just check? So it's an exceptional system, but it hasn't been approved through Section 36.
This happened last year under emergency use of this product, Elsabe, yes.
So I think, Elsabe, obviously there's some things that have happened that maybe as a expert in law, you would be surprised by and would query. And I think, in fairness to Dr. Mathibe, she is having to take on things that were decided when she was not part of SAPRA. So we're raising them to you, and we are hoping that we can discuss further, but we don't expect you to have the answer this morning. So thank you for listening, at least, Dr. Mathibe. All right, I've got another question also about Section 36 exemption. This is from Scott Maynard, and Scott was saying that he's got a range of trauma products that are important for public spaces. It's first responder products, things that would be really helpful in emergency conditions. They're focused on saving lives through bleeding control, Stop the Bleed in the USA and UK. So I'm kind of paraphrasing here, Scott, but basically they are class C and D in some cases. They've tried to get a Section 36 exemption, and it was turned down. And I think Scott's just trying to highlight how sometimes the jumping through the hurdles at SAPRA can end up with a product being refused, and it's actually sorely needed and very well documented in other locales. Scott, have I covered your question, or do you want to speak up and say what you want to say?
Thank you. If I can just jump in quickly. So our company focuses on products that are made publicly available in public spaces such as pubs, shopping centres, etc., to deal with stabbings, penetrating wounds, those kinds of injuries. And there's a number of campaigns globally that are run. There's Knife Savers in the UK, there's Stop the Bleed in the USA. We see a massive need for these products in Africa, and specifically in South Africa. We have a blood shortage. Everyone knows our blood stocks are low. So we brought these products to South Africa. They are currently sold to clinicians and hospital groups, but we'd like to see them rolled out into public spaces. We have a massive trauma load in South Africa, as everyone knows. So we made an exemption application to SAPRA, and to be quite blunt, it just seems to be stonewalled. We've tried to engage further to understand why, when we have very cost-effective life-saving equipment that we'd like to make publicly available, that is done so in many other locations in the world, we've been unsuccessful so far. So we would really like to engage further with SAPRA to understand why, when there's such a great need, we have been unsuccessful going through official channels, using great teams to help us put the applications in professionally, providing all the information and examples from around the world. And we really would love to engage with SAPRA and better understand how we can bring these products to the South African public.
Okay, so Dr. Mathibe, I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Yes, we can further engage because I think that's what I'll say. We can further engage. They can contact me, and then we can take it from there. This is the first time hearing about this, so maybe it's something that happened some time ago, but we can further engage on this.
Thank you for the question, Scott. And I'm sure there are other companies that have had similar barriers that they maybe need to engage. So the door is open. That's what we're hearing. Okay. Shivani says reclassification of IVDs in Europe is in accordance with the new IVDR. Okay. Following what was previously GHTF classification rules. And she's just asking, are these classification rules aligned with the South African regulations? So it's a little bit of a technical question, Shivani. I don't know, Dr. Mathibe, is there any disparity between the high and low risk IVDs and the way it's handled in Europe and in South Africa?
I think if I can answer to Shivani's questions, we have published the classification guidelines on our website, so she can honestly go back and compare that. And I want to reiterate something. If let's take if US FDA changes that classification, then we have to go back and change. Because now the IVDR is a new thing, so then we will be so confused. We have to take a stand on what is our classification and we have looked at other jurisdictions that we are inclined to. But if let's look at the 6 jurisdiction. If ANVISA changes, we have to change. If US FDA change, we have to change. No, we have to look at the holistic picture. We do look at the changes that are coming through from various jurisdictions and see the impact on what we have published. We do that. But we cannot change because one jurisdiction has changed, honestly. I think never position at all. We'll never have a position.
I agree with you that, you know, obviously you have to put a line in the sand. This is our approach. And at the same time, update as things progress, because I think that the world does move.
I agree.
But it's not something that you need to do every time there's a change. But if there's a particular disconnect, Shivani, then maybe that's something that you can bring to the ITG working group and we can highlight it. Because there have been a few disconnects with classification, particularly for implants. And that is an ongoing issue, which we thought was corrected, but hasn't actually been corrected. So I'm sure Dr. Mathibe will attend to that when we raise it to her. Okay. Then there's a lot of people want to know, are there any plans for online license submissions? Because, you know, there are other countries north of our border who are doing registrations through portals. It keeps everything really, you know, the data integrity part of it is really clear. You can see when you submitted, there's an audit trail of where the process is. Do you have any plans for online license submissions?
Yeah. That one, yes, definitely. We you know, as I'm saying at the back, we at the moment working on the licensing one. You know, we're trying to pass that hurdle of doing license application online, and at the other side, we're also looking at the registration one. Yes, but mainly focusing now on the license establishment, which is what we would like to publish sometime. But that will be communicated. Yes. That's the answer.
Right. Yes. All right, so that's in the pipeline. I see Ken Tati says, please can we clarify the due date for the payment of retention licenses? Is it the end of June? And when are we receiving invoices to pay? She requested invoices since April, but nothing to date. Well, I know the answer to this, Dr. Mathibe. Do you want to comment on invoices?
Okay. You're speaking to our finance department on the invoices. I will hope that they can assist you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think what has also happened is that there is there's an interaction. It is at the end of June, as far as I understand. Obviously, yes. Different companies have different obligations to pay their annual retention fees. So please be aware of that, everybody. And if you haven't already put the process in place, get it done. Okay. I think, is there anybody else who hasn't had their question answered? I know there's lots of people asking for timelines, but I think Dr. Mathibe has kind of answered that question. The one question I would like to raise that is a huge worry for us is special labeling for every medical device once it comes in, and which parts of the regulations pertain right now and which pertain at a future date. So I think if you could maybe just comment on the scope that you have and your unit has for maybe adjusting the labeling requirements, because they're pretty onerous and they're going to require possibly repackaging. And I'm not sure that in this modern day and age, it's really necessary to have physical labeling on packaging as required by the regulations as they stand in draft. That is something that we're going to have to debate. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Dr. Mathibe?
Oh, sorry, Mathibe.
I'm just basically asking whether there's any room for discussion on the labeling, because it seems very specific and going to be very awkward for people importing. And yeah.
So I think, you know, we spoke about, I hope we're not taking more time now. It seems as if the approach is very interesting, but yeah, for me, there are two topics that, you know, we indicated that we would like to have further engagement. There are two areas that I would like us to deep dive into and see and put them on the table, you know, if I can put it that way, and open it up and come up with something. It's the warehouse one as well as the label, and see what is feasible and what's possible and what's practical. Not only looking at the economic side of it as well, but also not forgetting that there is also compliance and then the regulatory requirements. Yes, so those two topics are, I think, maybe on our first meeting or our first engagement, so that it's our engagement are more focused. It should be the two areas that we break down and discuss.
That's fantastic. And, you know, what I would say as well is, remember that because we are building a regulatory framework in this country, we don't have to do everything on day one. Sometimes it's better to ramp things up in a practical way so that the companies are able to comply step by step. Because I think sometimes if too much is thrown at the industry at first, then what happens is that many people don't comply, and it kind of breaks down the control that you would like to have. I see Elsabe, no, wait, hang on. A follow-up, are we not going to be penalized for not paying? Only one day left. That's about the retention fees, penalties. I think that we must address that to the finance department. Am I right, Dr. Mathibe?
Yes, and also, honestly, if I may ask, why do you wait on the last day to pay? Why do that? Honestly, I'm not being. I'm just asking that question.
No, it's a good question.
Mathibe, I think you didn't get my question. I said I've been requesting for the invoices since April, and they have not been sending me the invoice. I can't just pay. I need the invoice to pay. I've been sending emails to finance, to June, to everybody there, and I'm not getting the invoices.
Okay, but the question I'm receiving from my end was like, if I have 1 day left. So for me was like, that's where it was coming. So if I made an assumption, I would like to take that back.
That's why I indicated them just a follow-up.
Oh, because I'm not seeing the question, so I would like to take that back if it's okay.
No, that's all good. It's all good. You know, obviously you can't see the questions typed up. So I've got another question that's from Elsabe. There are many Section 36 applications, in particular from advertising, outstanding. Is there a plan to address those? There are also inconsistencies in who get those and who don't. So this is the Section 36 applications, in particular from the advertising regs. So the question is, why do some people get exemptions and others don't? What it's inconsistent.
Yeah, and I would like to engage Elsabe on that particular part, maybe of the
call.
Yeah, exactly, because it's now I can see the direction that it's taking, and maybe it will be better if we all are in the same understanding of where is this coming from. Elsabe?
Yes, we can talk about that. Yes. I'd need to get a mandate from my various clients on that just before we can address it.
Engage it. Oh, thank you.
Okay, and then, you know, the other thing around advertising, just to give everybody a heads up, in the new draft of the regulations, there has been an attempt to accommodate industry comments. That was one of the areas where there was some movement in the wording. However, what was a little bit disappointing, Dr. Mathibe, is that the wording is actually not, it hasn't been drafted in a way that is very understandable. I think it's a bit of an error in terms of the wording. So that might be something that we can easily correct and get clarity on. But basically, so everybody knows, I think the intention, and I might be speaking out of turn here, but it looks to me like the advertising clause tries to accommodate the fact that medical devices in the higher classes might well need to be advertised to healthcare professionals, and that there's no real reason why they shouldn't be. But if you want to advertise to the public, there might be some sort of reasons why you wouldn't. So I think this is also something that we will discuss at our workshop if we've got time, because I know that is a huge issue for the industry, because that is it's borrowed from the medicines regulations, where, you know, medicines regulations restrict advertising to the public above certain schedules, but you cannot equate scheduling of medicines with risks of medical devices. It doesn't really hang together, because you can think about diabetic patients. Maybe they need to know something that's really high risk, but it's something that they need to get information and access to. So there are exceptions where you would want to be advertising high risk to the public. So this is something that's also a bit contentious. All right, let's move on. Everybody's talking about invoices, and then, okay, somebody says on the subject of invoices, if there was a simple email reminder issued to license holders. Yeah, it's just basically saying, you know, could we get a heads up that we have to pay? And then, will electronic IFUs be accepted, or does it have to be hard copy? That's a question from Francisca. Electronic versus hard copy.
When we publish the requirements for product registration, we will look into that, especially considering the, you know, the size and everything of the IVD, but we'll communicate that. And it's something that we, when we're looking at the label, because we'll also publish, you know, extract some information from the recs so that it's visible, you know, because some people will not be going back to the recs. And then we will indicate whether the online is acceptable. We'll indicate that it's part of our review on our guideline, one of our guidelines, yes. That is been taken into consideration. Maybe let me put it like that, that
All right,
online
awesome.
will be accepted.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Look, I think, you know, that there is something in the regs and in the law which talks about electronic as well, Francisca, so we can look at that in more detail. All right, we've lots of talking about invoices. Will SAPRA align to the global UDI requirements? That's a question from Lisa Turnison. That's a unique device indicator or identifier requirements. Are we going UDI? Do you happen to know? Teresa? No?
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I
so
can.
the question is, will SAPRA align to global UDI requirements? Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, we'll review all the various requirements, Madeleine, and then when we publish, it will be clear. Yes, exactly.
All right. Okay, so these are kind of the questions. Maybe if the answers aren't forthcoming today, at least these are the things that industry is thinking about. Then there's a really good question from Nondamiso. She says, the requirement for labeling states that the registration number, local contact details of establishment license holders needs to be included on the packaging label. Why is this also a requirement for IFU when the same information is required on the packaging label? Re-IFU, will soft copies be permitted? As the regs state that IFU should be packaged with the product. However, IFUs are now digitally available for download. So it's more questions about the labeling issue, which is definitely something that Dr. Mathibe has offered us in terms of workshopping. We're going to look at what is practical, what fulfills the mandate, and how can we find each other. I think this is a new discussion with new people. I'm looking forward to engaging with the regulator on the practicalities of the regulations. And I'm sure we can come to an agreement where, it's possible and affordable and doesn't actually make people exit the market because it's too difficult. So I really hope that our discussions will bear fruit and be in the spirit of this kind of sentiment. Okay, guys, this is we're at the end of questions. Is there anything further? If I see as another question, sterilization methods and controls in accordance to 13485 are not covered in the regulation. This again leads to a lack of understanding of what patient safety is and should be included into our response. So that's just a comment about sterilization and how we should meet the requirements of patient safety. I think that it is under ISO 13485. It's not as explicit as it basically you have to bring standards in that cover your essential principles of safety and performance, and sterilization is a very clear standard. There's certain minimum requirements for sterilization method and control, which is under another standard. But your ISO 13485 quality management system should refer to the requirement of that standard. That's how I would see it. I hope that answered your question. Dr. Mathibe?
I also wanted to say that when you do ISO 13485, you're looking at the processes that you follow to have your end product, isn't it? And if sterilization is one of them, it indicates that you have to put controls in place to ensure that it complies to the set specification. So, and I agree with Madeleine, there are methods that are used, various methods that are used for sterilization. So definitely the ISO will not be saying, EO, you do it like this is a method, and this is a certain method that you follow for this particular product. As a manufacturer, it's part of your processes that you have to control.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So maybe you just need to bring your sterilization method under control under your quality management system. I hope, if anybody's got further questions about that kind of thing, we can definitely make it a subject of a regulatory forum. And Dr. Mathibe, you have a standing invitation if you want to communicate to this group about certain things and maybe have questions. We can arrange another regulatory forum as you get into your job and you start to see the lie of the land and maybe want to go back to your stakeholders. This is also one of the opportunities that we would like to extend to you. You're always welcome to ask for a slot, and we have regulatory forums pretty much every month. So, it is good, an opportunity for an informal discussion. All right, I see Chris Visser has a question from, he says, is there an update on the harmonization and alignment of the requirements for SAPRA and radiation control? So Chris, is that talking about our registration with radiation control?
Yeah, so they work differently, and yet they work on the same products. So there's different requirements for the two different departments. And now that radiation control is under SAPRA, there was hoped to be harmonization and alignment of the requirements, because for radiation control, there's a smaller subset that would, even though products are approved by SAPRA, radiation control would prevent them from being imported under the current regs.
Okay, well, I don't know if you have an answer this stage.
Yes, the answer is yes. And I think maybe the good part is that they both fall under one unit at the moment. So the radiation control, we looked at it, and as you indicated, Chris, that there are, when it's approved by the medical device, it's called program. The first program, it's sub-program under medical device. So now they fall under one head, and we're trying to harmonize that we don't. I'm looking for a word. When we're doing our guidelines for radiation control, they will be aligned to the medical device unit when it comes to registration. So yes, you're correct.
So I see
and at the current moment, okay,
yeah.
sorry, you can
go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Mathibe.
Oh, yes. So at the current moment, there were two systems that were separating, that were working separately. So now they're coming together into one business unit. So what I'm saying is that the radiation control and medical device are under one business unit. And we looked at the two processes and currently working on how we can align it, looking at, because we have to consider what the HES Act and the various regulations that were published in the year, so that we ensure that it's also within the boundaries of the both acts as well as the regulations, and see how we can amend that so that it's aligned. Yes. So we are we are looking into that as well, yeah, because they fall under one unit.
All right, and I see Elsabe is raising the fact that Hazardous Substances Act has not been amended to take the power away from the DG and NDOH. So there does need to be some tidying up of the acts and where they conflate. Look, we are out of time. I just wanted to say, yes, go ahead.
If I've taken too much of your time, guys, I apologize. Maybe it's because it's not that much structured, hence it went this way.
No. It was exactly what we needed as an introductory interaction with you, and thank you so much for the time. We're going to have a further session now with Dr. Elsabe Klinck, who's going to talk to us about the draft regulations. But I just want to say a big thank you to you, Dr. Teresa Mathibe from SAPRA. I know that it was brave of you to come and stand in front of industry and answer questions when you're so new to the role, although you do know the story, and I'm sure none of the questions were a surprise. And, we really look forward to workshopping with you and the decision makers. Let's see if we can maybe make some progress in this particular realm of regulation and really get it right, so that everybody can relax and can actually be compliant in a relatively simple way. That's really the goal. Let's try and do it right and also meet the mandate of protection of patients. So I just want to say a big thank you to you for your time. I'm sure you're very busy with so much going on at SAPRA, and we look forward to further engagements in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me as well. And I think we need to further communicate on when is our next meeting, especially regarding the issues that we need to discuss. So I think maybe we can communicate on email from my side and take this forward.
All right, thank you
very
so
much. And your time as well. Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, guys. So now we have a session on what we need to submit in terms of the draft regulations. And we've got Dr. Elsabe Klinck from Elsabe Klinck and Associates. She's a long-standing partner with us in SAMED. She's helped us and advised us over the years. She has provides legal guidance to the wider medical sector, and she's going to be taking us through some of the important considerations when we start to comment on new draft regulations and the key comments that SAMED and member companies should consider making. So, Elsabe, over to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So I've just got a few points on, I think, the legal aspects of the device regulation. So I've been poppying for most of the past month. So I haven't looked into a lot of the details of the device regulations, but we can discuss this afterwards and perhaps see what are the things that concerns people most. So the first thing that struck me when I looked at the draft regs is it looks like the medicines regs. So it follows that whole sequence as well. So whereas the 2016 device regs started off with licensing, for example, here it's the other way around, which kind of made me get the feeling that we've gone back to following medicines as a blueprint and not looking at what would be appropriate for devices. So that's the first thing that I think that struck me. The second thing is the issue of licensing. So the conditions that could be put on a license, and what we've seen now with COVID in the past year and into this year, that if you bring in new products, you may face that you have to ask for a license amendment. And that's very, very concerning, because the numbers of products that you guys have, if you have to every time ask for a license amendment when you bring in a new product, that would be massively administratively problematic. And it does seem like it links with this issue with the COVID or the COVID product. So I think that is something that we need to carefully look at. The next thing for me is the advertisements that Madeleine has already alluded to. And the escape there is that you can apply to the authority. However, from a legal point of view, exemptions must go through Section 36. It can't be in the regs, a separate, different process, and we don't know what the criteria are. So in law, you'll call that an unauthorized delegation of legislative power. You want the regs to say up front who would fall within that exemption or in that category of being able to advertise or not. The main problem, I think, still is that categorization draw on the medicines regs and what we have in medicine. So, I mean, even if we talk implants, you can advertise to me as much as you want. I cannot lay my hands on an implant, and even if I do, I can't tonight say, oh, Louis and I are going to do a pacemaker procedure. It's not like a Schedule 6 medicine where there's a risk that somebody could harm themselves with it. So, and I think that fundamental difference between what does scheduling for medicines mean, it's about the use, whereas device classification is pre-registration. And I remember one of the big device conferences that we had at Birchwood, there was a brilliant guy from overseas that explained that so nicely, why scheduling of medicine is not equivalent to the classification of devices. And I think we may need to revisit that because that informs the advertisement issue. Then I think on both Section 36 and 24A, 36 on exemption and 24A on appeals, we need to have provisions on appeals processes. It is because the Medicines Act requires that. And currently those provisions are sitting in the medicines regs and not in the medical device regs. And the same with the Section 36s. I think if we can tailor make those processes, and that's why, sometimes we get responses from people in pharmaceuticals on 36s. Sometimes none of the device Section 36 exemptions have been published, for example, and it is a statutory requirement. So we need to see how we can make that process better. And then just the issue on Section 21s, which is also has happened as a result of COVID, and where the initial Section 21 requirement was that wasn't supposed to apply to devices is now being applied to devices, but there's no regulations for it. So if a device then in future gets called up and it is subject to registration and somebody wants to bring in an unregistered device, how will that process work? With medicines, we know it's about unmet medical need and so on, and it needs to be done in the name of a doctor and all of that. But we definitely need a process for that. So those are my general comments on the regs. What I have done as well, and I'll share it with the SAMED committee, is the fact that to see what must be in regulations, we must look at what is in Section 35, because Section 35 says on what must we have regulations. And remember, must be regulations on how the registration certificate must look, how the license must look, There's regulations on timelines that we should have. So I think we have to go through the whole of Section 35 with all of those Roman numerals and see what regulations do we have in the draft and what is missing, and then make a proposal in terms of that. So that's just by introduction. So Madeleine, I don't know if we should fire away and hear people's comments and concerns. Also on not only on the draft regs, but also what you've experienced, because remember, regulations are implementation things. So what you experience, we can then propose regulations for to make the process simpler and more clear and so on.
Okay, that's really good pointers. I mean, I love the fact that we can introduce regulation for things that we've experienced that are unfair and don't work. That's a fantastic idea. And guys, really think about that. I see Sarah Cohen has got a comment about, very odd, Elsabe, the IVD drafting. It seemed like it fell off, or they intentionally left it out. I don't know. What is your take on that?
I have no idea. So the stuff from IVDs that were left are the things on the clinical investigations. But with the classification, for example, that totally fell off. And my suspicion is, and I've got no proof of that, is because people use the medicines regs as a template and not necessarily, I think, worked from the device regs or even Section 35, because Section 35 tells you on what must you have regs. So, and it's very clear in Section 35, medical devices and IVDs are different. And it's different for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, so in a lab, the lab doesn't sell the PCR test. The company sells it to the lab, and the lab uses that and then determines a price to patients. So the whole system is different, and I think it's really important that we bring that back. SALDA has, through many years, worked very hard to make sure that the difference between normal medical devices and IVD medical devices are clear, and how that is different is I think might have gotten lost in this set of draft regs. So there's probably for the IVD sector and for SALDA more work in making sure that the regs are in line with the devices, and also address, not only the lab test, but also the PCRs, the point of care tests and rapid tests and so on, that, there's adequate regulations that's aligned with global best practice.
Thanks for that insight. I must say that was something that we noticed immediately. Elsabe, the other thing that I wanted your opinion on is this management or regulation by guideline. The fact that there've been these communications to industry, the MD 1 to 22, I don't know what number we're on now. I mean, what is the legal standing of that? And, if it doesn't sit well with industry, what recourse do we have?
Okay. So you cannot govern by guideline, and there's a High Court ruling against the National Department of Health on this. Remember the reference price list, and I think I remember in those days we actually had a SAMED workshop here in Bryanston at the Country Club on the reference price list in those days, and that was declared unlawful by the courts because the department issued all of these guidelines to say how must the data look that you submit for the reference price list and all of that, and didn't regulate by regulation. So one needs to regulate by regulation because that's law. SAPRA is part of the executive arm of government. It executes what is in the law. It cannot make law. So, and that is why it's important that we go back to the Act and we say, what does the Act allow us to do? Then we draft the regs to give the flesh to what is in the Act. And then the guidelines should be implementation issues but it can't go beyond. And that's where the concept of ultra vires comes from. It can't go beyond the Act and the regulations. So, and this is why that one provision, like with the advertising, where it says, you know what, SAPRA can kind of say in certain circumstances, you can advertise to the public, although it's a Class C or D device. That's a good example of you actually want the regs to be clear and not to be in this legal uncertainty, will or won't I get this, you know, will the diabetes products, will the emergency products that prevents people from bleeding to death, or, you know, your defibrillators at airports, you know, can we advertise that to the public or not? You don't want uncertainty on that and then perhaps have inconsistencies in how that gets implemented. So I think it's really important that everything in a guideline must go back to a regulation and must go back into the Act. So conditions, for example, can't be set, even if it's laudable, even if it's the best possible condition that we set on a license, if it doesn't relate back to the regs and the Act. And you'll see the Act actually in section 35 says the conditions must all be prescribed. So this way we may get a condition, and that we've also had in vitro diagnostics, that suddenly, you know, tests must be done by NHLS before your product can be allowed into the country, and they do kind of an HTA or a what. I mean, all of that, it should actually be in regulation. So SAPRA is a creature of statute, and it needs to implement what's in the law. So I think we have to check the guidelines, and there is exemption processes. So if we have a crisis like with COVID, use the correct mechanism, create an exception, you know, the call up and the 6 months thing, you can do a section 36 and say, okay, these things are now up for a kind of an expedited, a COVID light assessment, because there hasn't been a proper assessment of COVID devices, but, you know, it's kind of a quasi-regulatory process that was followed. So, but just do it the right way. Don't through guidelines suddenly set things, or suddenly now we need to do section 21s, and we're all confused as to what it should be, because, and if you ask people, say, didn't you read the guideline? And I say, yeah, I read the guideline, but I also read the regs and the Act, and I don't see it complies with that. So I think it would be wise for SAPRA to make sure that their guidelines relate to the regs and the Act, and that they don't fall into the trap that the National Department fell into by regulating by guideline. You don't regulate by guideline. A guideline gives you practical details.
Yeah, no, that's obviously very clear, and it's been very treacherous for companies trying to step through this particular line, especially under pandemic conditions. The other big bugbear for us is the wholesaler license and the fact that we want to get rid of it. And, you know, I know it's in the Act, but I heard somebody make the suggestion that it's called a pharmaceutical wholesale license, and it can be in the regs, but it cannot pertain to medical devices, maybe. Because, Elsabe, just so that you understand why we have such an objection to the wholesaler license, it actually skews the market, because what happens is, if you're a distributor and you want to buy from another company in South Africa, you need a wholesaler license as well. But if you import it from overseas, you don't need a wholesaler license. So guess what you do? If you're going to choose between company A in Pretoria and importing from overseas, you're going to go with the overseas import because it just simplifies your regulatory life. So there is no place for wholesaling in the supply chain. It doesn't exist overseas. Please, what can we do about that?
Yeah, so we need to change the Act for that. Remember, Section 22C actually had devices in right from the start. It's one of the few sections in the Act that before the 2017 amendments, actually had it in. So we'd need to, an interim solution would be a Section 36 exemption, okay? And then a final solution would be an amendment to 22C and 22H, because that's the thing that says you can only buy from the primary importer or the local manufacturer as a wholesaler, and there can't be a longer supply chain. And this is something that we raised in the 20, whenever the initial amendments came, Madeleine, when we went to see Selu. I don't know if you remember.
I do. It's been hanging around for a long time.
Yeah, in that set and in the 2014 version, SAMED did comment that the supply chain for devices look different, and that we need to not use the pharmaceutical supply chain as is. So I think we need to, so that will definitely require a statutory amendment. We can raise it now with the device regs, and also give the solution would be Section 36, an industry-wide Section 36 exemption, like they do with the Schedule 0 medicines. Everybody who's in that field get that exemption. And I think, and SAMED, may need to do that Section 36 application as a trade association on behalf of its wholesaling members. So I think we need to, but it will require a legislative change, and it relates to both 22C and 22H.
Oh, well, that's really a practical solution. Let's see whether we can push that through. I have a feeling that SAPRA would like to find a solution to that, but they keep saying that it's in the Act. So the other thing that is not clear to me is, now that we have draft regulations on regulations, what is the status of the regulations, not the draft?
Yeah.
And then also, clearly, because we don't have product call-up, what pertains and what doesn't in terms of the reg? I mean, right now it is a real soup in my head. I can't tell you what pertains and what doesn't. Can you maybe comment?
Yeah, so the December 2016 device regulations are still in force, okay? I believe a whole bunch of them are ultra vires the Empowering Act, because remember, it was put into effect in December 2016, and in June 2017, the amendments to the Medicines Act came into effect. And by then, we should have aligned, like we've done with the medicines regs, we should have aligned it with the amendments. So, with exactly how the 2017 changes to the Medicines Act came in. And that's why the regs still talk about council and not SAPRA. And that's also why those regs kind of say, in the interim, if we think something could be unsafe, we can do something about it. But it was because there was no devices included in the previous version of the Medicines Act. Okay, but then we included it and we said you need to call up before you can register. But now we rely on these 2016 regs to kind of control certain medical devices. And that's what is ultra vires. However, if we identify it as ultra vires, that's one thing. It doesn't become ultra vires until somebody challenges it in court. And it was really close, I think, in the past 12 months that people were to challenge it. And then the draft regs came out in May. So people then held off on that. I think our biggest task would be that we make sure the regs align with the Act as it should, and that all the regulations are there that we need, that is kind of referred to in sections in the Act, and then in particular in Section 35. But the 2016 regs is in force and effect as we sit here. And although there are provisions that are ultra vires the Empowering Act, it's in force and effect until somebody challenges it.
Okay, so when you have regulations that pertain to product registration, for example, labeling, that doesn't pertain at the moment. So that's an example of where it doesn't pertain.
Yeah.
But so I think maybe what would be helpful for industry is to actually have a little clause by clause, this pertains, this doesn't pertain, because I often get questions, and I know that SAMED often has members who question what is actually live. So yeah, I just wonder if you're going to be doing some consulting work for us during this process. I know that you're very taken up with Poppy, but maybe that's something I could ask the office to request of you, is what is the status of each clause? Because, you know, how can we label if we don't have an applicant number? We don't agree with the labeling in the first place. You know, what do we do with advertising? What is the status?
You see, but the labeling, remember, if you, under the previous Act, there was nothing that, apart from that, in Section 35, there was that brief kind of regulations that said you can make regulations to govern medical devices. It was a very broad thing. And the whole 2016 regs is under that. So on that, you could argue that perhaps the labeling is not ultra vires, because there was no, under the previous version, there was no, or let me reword. It is ultra vires, but it's not challenged. So because there was no call up in the previous version. Now there is a call up, and we must say, hang on, part of product registration is then this whole labeling and whatever else, and that means that that is ultra vires and it should not be applied. So that we kind of argue and say to SAPRA, if you apply certain regs under the 2016 regs, we could challenge you for it being ultra vires. So, but they'll have to final the new regs before we land up in court. I can guarantee you that. So I'm not sure how fruitful that would be. So I think this is more something that one would, on a case-by-case basis, or if there's a group of people, you know, people with COVID products or people with products of a particular nature that suddenly face this, being, you know, face anything adverse on the 2016 regs. Let's then tackle that as a group and say, you know what, the advertisement stuff can't apply for the following reasons. Or the, I mean, the device vigilance can or cannot apply. So going through that and see where there is a SAMED subgroup interest, and are people facing the implementation of the 2016 regs, and it actually doesn't make sense because it is ultra vires.
All right, I see Sharika's got a question. Sharika, do you want to unmute and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Madeline. Hi, Elsabe. Madeline, I don't think my point when I brought up ISO 13485 was I don't think Dr. Mathibe actually understood the concerns that industry has. I mean, we all discussed this before, and you know, in the 2016 regulations, ISO 13485 was not mentioned. It just said a medical device accreditation, ISO accreditation, and we were also then challenged with not having any guidelines. I mean, you know, from SANAS or from SAPRA, and we also then, I mean, we didn't know about the requirement of having an ISO before, you know, when we're doing a renewal until I think maybe 2 years down the line. So, it wasn't that we had 5 years to do it. It's, we haven't had the communication from SAPRA. It wasn't in the regulations. We don't have guidance from SANAS. We probably don't have enough assessment bodies also to service our entire industry. So there were a lot of challenges around this issue. So yes, we are trying to play catch up now as industry, but I think it's still an important topic to talk about, because we do have local companies that, one, can't afford it, or two, are now trying to play catch up and might miss the deadline. Two, we have multinationals, but we also needed to have some kind of guidance to roll out our ISO accreditation. So, in that sense, it is still a big concern, I think, for industry, and should still be discussed with SAPRA on the way forward. I don't know about what the other members of the meeting think, but I think that we should definitely still keep this on the table for discussion.
Yeah, no, your point is noted, Sharika. My impression was, to be fair to Dr. Mathibe, she is entering a new role, and so she doesn't have all the answers instantly, but I think she probably understands very well what the concern is, and probably just doesn't have a particular plan. And we will take
Madeline,
that forward.
to that point, to that point, I mean, she mentioned, well, we had 5 years. If she was also working in industry, so she knows the challenges. She would know that we had no communication from SANAS from the very beginning.
That's true. That is true.
So to say that we've had 5 years, I think that was, a little bit unfair to the industry, because we didn't have 5 years.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Elsabe, do you have a comment on that?
ISO is not in the 2016 regs. It just says a quality management system. That's all that it says.
Correct.
There was subsequent to that no promulgation, any official notice in the government gazette that says, by now you must do this X and not Y. And I mean, for in vitro diagnostics, it's in any case a different standard than it is for devices. So I think it is, it can't be implemented, and it can't be a requirement because it has never been made. It just says a quality management system. That's it. Doesn't say anything more. So,
and now that in the draft it is mentioned that to renew a license you do need the ISO 13485, then the 5 year needs to start now. It should not have started back then in 2016.
That's exactly correct. That you can't make provisions go into the past. It can only go into the future.
Can I suggest that we also make a note of this topic for further discussion with SAPRA? For the chair.
It will be taken aboard. In fact, Sharika, there's no way that this particular aspect will be forgotten, because it is a huge issue for many, many companies.
Yes.
And it's what I'm trying to tell people is, try and get your quality management system ready. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, this is a draft regulation, and this is the first time that they've specifically mentioned ISO 13485. So it's still not even day one for that, as far as I can understand. Am I right, Elsabe? It's not day one of
day one once the regs come into effect. So it can't be day one before.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Well, look, I know this is an area that is hugely worrying for people, because they don't want to have their licenses revoked because they haven't got an accredited quality management system. At the same time, we all understand that it is a way of leveling the playing field, because at what has happened, and Andre Tenalpel has raised this in the working group. He's somebody who helps clients get quality management systems. And actually what happens is that you can be some sort of startup fly-by-night medical device establishment that doesn't put anything in place, and you can pass muster at the regulator, and meantime your competitor next door has spent all the money to get all their ducks in a row and get an accredited quality system, which actually protects the patient, and yet you're treated the same way by the regulator, and that is actually fundamentally unfair. And that was the point that was being made at the ITG prep meeting that we had last week. So, you know, there are considerations where, you know, there's actually almost anti-competitive situations that have arisen because of the uncertainty. I don't know if we can raise that or...
Yeah, it's not about, if they didn't say in the regs, an accredited quality management system. We cannot read it in because it suits us, because it will keep unscrupulous players out. It must be written like that in the law then, and say an accredited quality management system or something. We can't blame the unscrupulous vendors because the regs have been wrongly drafted, and we can't make things applicable into the past because the 2016 regs were not appropriately drafted. So we have to be careful that also in our discussions we don't agree on things that are not in the law and say, okay, but let's all now apply it like that, because that's dangerous territory. If we all agree that, oh, it's okay, let's use our own things. And this is why I said, even if you have the best motive in the world, like with COVID, you are still not allowed to act against what is clearly written in the law.
So, guys, there's quite a number of us on the call. Now's your opportunity to have questions come forward that maybe Elsabe, with all her wealth of knowledge, can help you with. Please, by all means, unmute yourself and ask, or raise your hand, and I can coordinate that. Anybody else got a question? So while we're waiting for questions to come to the fore, there is a question that I have, and that is around what recourse we have if comments are not taken on board. We're going to spend a lot of time yet again creating the best possible submissions that we can. And I also urge all of you to echo what the industry is saying and send your submissions in. We've got until mid-August to do that. We've also been promised a workshop, and I mean, there's absolutely no intention of excluding people, but obviously we can't have 100 people at the workshop, but you will be represented, and you can always send your issues to SAMED or SALDA or your trade association, whatever pertains, to get that voice through to the workshop. But my question to Elsabe is, what happens if we do all this work and then for spurious reasons the regulations just come out as they have in the past, thrown over the wall, not much changes? What happens then?
The only way to address that would be to then challenge it, you know, to see if you've got legal grounds to challenge it, either because it's ultra vires or to request to get a mandamus to force SAPRA to recommend certain regs. So that's the recourse that we have. We could also try Section 24A and do an appeal to SAPRA to say to them what you've recommended to the minister, because remember, that's how the regs work under Section 35. SAPRA's board recommends the regs to the minister, and to say that we're challenging that decision that you've made, that the regs must look like this and that you're not duly considering our input. One can also challenge the regs on administrative law grounds. That was how the pricing regs were challenged by the pharmacists a few years back, is to say that in this process of lawmaking for regulations, there must be due consideration of relevant facts, and irrelevant facts must be discarded, and so on. So there would be grounds for an internal process that's not a formal court process through Section 24A, and then from there one can tackle it. But I think, I mean, that's reactive. So the better we can work proactively, and to make sure that people understand, like this engagement that you had earlier this morning. I mean, that's exactly what you want, is a better understanding. And I think that understanding needs to filter through to the people in the inspectorate in particular, that deals with law enforcement, because many of them are pharmaceutically inclined, and this is why we have a problem with the Section 36s. So I think we have to try to do what we can to create that what we want, to lobby for what we want. And if that means, again, sitting with the drafters in the National Department of Health and the lawyers in SAPRA. I understand there's now more than one lawyer in SAPRA. So it may be important to do so, to create that understanding. Because I don't think there's necessarily maliciousness. I think there's good intentions, but it's good intentions perhaps from a pharmaceutical point of view and not from a device point of view.
So to that point, I mean, obviously, you know, you and I, we've walked this road together. We've been to Parliament, we've spoken to people over the years, but often it's very personality driven. Sometimes you just have somebody who simply will not necessarily, it doesn't really want to make the changes. There was a question to Momina Omarjee. We were at a SAPRA call via the ITG, and we asked whether we could have access to the Medical Device Expert Committee. And they're the people who advise the medical device unit on matters that, you know, where things have to be deliberated. You know, it's almost like a Medicines Control Council for medical devices, I imagine. I'm not 100% sure of their role or their mandate or even their, you know, legal standing. We were told under no circumstances could we contact individuals in the expert group, and that industries knowing about them was considered to be like almost a corrupt practice. And, you know, they didn't want us to be talking to their experts. Now, in an environment where we are growing a regulatory framework and we are walking a journey from almost square one, I think that that's probably unfortunate, because shouldn't we be debating those people exactly about the issues that we have, rather than, you know, being held away from them in case we might influence them? So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
So they're correct in that you shouldn't have one-on-one engagements.
Shouldn't be.
Formalized engagement process is important. It's also important to know who these people are. So who's been appointed and what their mandate and their terms of reference are. What is, because remember, there's only one structure in the Medicines Act through which SAPRA acts, and that is its board. It's very clear in Section 2, I think it is, or I don't know if it's 2B, but it is very clear that SAPRA acts through its board. So these committees can only be advisories, but we need to know who it is and what their mandate is. So that's really, really important. Yeah, I see there's a question on the removal of the entire appeal process. I'm not sure if that is a proposal, because the point that we've made in terms of Section 24A is that there must be an appeals process in the device regs. There is an appeals process now in the medicines regs, but not for devices. So all that we rely on for devices is Section 24A. That doesn't give a lot of detail. So yeah.
So do we, is the suggestion that we try and put it back? I'm not clear what.
Yeah, so Section 24A does talk about appeals, okay? And you can use that appeals process to challenge anything. Like, for example, these decisions by this device committee. You should be able to see the decision and to challenge it. And then if you're not happy, to appeal it in terms of the Section 24A process. But 24A is just one section. It doesn't contain procedures and what you need to do and blah, 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 which is what we'd want in regulations. So I think that would be extremely useful also to have proper timelines, because currently, you know, it says you need to lodge the appeal within 30 days, and then the meeting with the CEO doesn't happen in 90 or 120 days, you know, so that is something that must be in the regs for the appeals process. But your question on the device committee also links to that, because how can you take a decision on appeal if you don't know, you know, who made that decision, and do they have the power to make the decision, and you know what were they thinking behind it?
Yeah.
So, and that's why I think that's the secrecy around this device committee, I don't understand. We can, of course, propose that the committee must have a particular standing and mandate under the device regs. So that is possible to do it in as a way. And then we say, this is how our ideal device committee would look.
That's actually a fantastic idea. You see, these are the things, remember guys, when you are looking at the regulations and you see things that are not in the regulations, Elsabe is saying, as long as there is a way to link it to the Act, it should be in regulations if that is what industry needs. So think about what is not in the regulations as well as what is in the regulations that we don't like. So, you know, really, I mean, I must say it's fantastic having somebody with a legal background helping us frame our thinking on this, because, you know, it's not just a matter of what we don't like. I see Hanli Olivier says we are JPJ Medical, a warehouse which do warehousing, distribution and RFID labeling for the consignment process. We do not own any products, so where do we fall under? SAPRA see us as a manufacturer. Okay, Elsabe?
So yeah, this is one of the things. I think this goes to the whole wholesaling issue. I mean, there's other examples as well where companies are regulated as manufacturers and they shouldn't be. So for example, some companies who just do device procurement and maintenance are labeled manufacturers, which I think is also wrong. So we need to revisit that whole definition of a manufacturer. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing preventing somebody from challenging it currently and to challenge the interpretation of the definitions. But the best way is to change the definitions, and then in the long term to change section 22C and 22H. And as I say, the stopgap in the interim is always a section 36 exemption, which is, I think, the easiest way to deal with it, yeah, in the interim.
Excellent. So yeah, the difficulty with section 36, of course, is that you have to get a unanimous decision through.
No, that's not true. No, that was an old act.
Oh, it's an old act. Okay.
A new act, yeah. When they amended, it's not new. The June 2017 version.
So section 36 is no longer unanimous.
No. No.
So what is the criteria for getting it passed?
So that's part of the problem. That's why I raised section 21 and section 36. Is so you just need to make a good case why you must be exempted from a particular regulatory criterion, and that's how companies who've got section 36s on the advertisements have been successful in, for example, saying why it's important to communicate with the public, or you know why it is impossible to have a particular labeling thing or whatever. So it's all it's possible to do, and in a sense the wideness of 36 now could help us. We have to be careful if we narrow it down in regulations, because it may narrow the scope of what we could do, but people can think about that perhaps and their experiences. What I do think we need with section 36 is to say there must be a dedicated advisory committee, so that I get replies on Section 36s from pharmaceutical people and sometimes from device people, and then but this is totally different. So to set a framework, a process, and timelines, of course. I have Section 36 clients whose applications have been in the system from before COVID, which means we're going on to 2 years.
Yeah.
So, those are the things that I think we can do in a proposed set of regulations under Section 36. And we've got better defense for this than pharmaceuticals, because the products are so wide ranging. With medicines, it's kind of finite, the manifestation of it. With devices, the manifestations of it is massive. I mean, somebody who sells software as a device, the software doesn't come through Port Health, so it goes through the internet. So there are things that may make us, you can never do a medicine through the internet, but you can do, the actual device can come through the internet. So I think there's merit in saying we need a very streamlined, good Section 36 process for devices.
Well, that's really excellent advice, and I definitely think we'll put that into the comments. I see there's a question, who's the correct contact person at SAPRA to submit Section 36(2)?
I spray and pray, okay?
Spray and pray.
So exactly what we were told we mustn't do, I do, because you just never know. This is why I'm saying we need a proper process. And perhaps now that we've got a new dedicated person who understands our industry, is to ask her for device Section 36, to whom do we address it? Look, formally, everything must be formally addressed to the CEO. It's like in the past with the NCC, it was directed to the registrar. So that's the formal designation, but the actual person who receives it, yeah, I think we must ask. Perhaps that's a question that SAMED can ask.
Definitely can. All right, so we've got Daphne Machadi has been put up as somebody who might be able to help. She's not responding.
Yeah, she's not.
Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
I don't know, long story.
All right, guys. Come on, any other questions? You've got a few more minutes of such valuable time as our advocate has. I don't know if there's anything else that springs to mind. Are you ready? Have you framed your comments, and do you have doubts about any of the comments that you might want to be making? In which case, we can definitely run it past Elsabe's organization, just to make sure that what we're asking for doesn't fail at the first hurdle because it's not sound from a legal point of view. So I think the pointer is, don't try and put things into regulation that don't have standing in the Act. Don't try to manage and govern by guideline, and also don't ask for regulatory clauses that will end up being ultra vires and will not actually be able to be implemented at all. So we need to go in there with really cogent and well thought out arguments for what we want in our submission. I see in the email, please CC the unit as well. Are you saying the medical device unit? That's can you see there? Yeah, okay. All right. Can you see there from SAPRA?
Yeah, so we can understand that then that we can, I'm not sure which email address is that. If that is, can you see this address? Because I think
put it in the chat for us, if you don't mind. Then we can maybe clarify that for the people on the call. Will you do that for us? Can you see it? Yeah. Would it be possible to get the definition of an authorized rep aligned? Yes. And then have a person appointed as the person responsible for regulatory compliance, as with EU MDR. I mean, that's a really fantastic suggestion. Elsa, what do you think?
That's something that we have raised, and I'm laughing about it because we have raised this
multiple times.
Yeah, I mean,
multiple times.
ad nauseam. So it is really high time that we get it sorted. Yeah.
Also, remember, there's some really, really good comments from last time, which still pertain. So we're not going to lose that. Lizzie, you know, I know that some of these things were not taken up in the regulations, in which case we will put them forward again. So make sure that you know, your issues don't get lost. I mean, I'm trying very hard not to let anything get left behind. This is an opportunity for us. All right. Anything further, guys? There we go. Kanisile's email and Dimokatsu Mathibe. Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. Kanisile, I don't know if you saw, but you got quite a lot of compliments in the chat in the previous session for your responsiveness and helpfulness. So I just wanted to say thank you from industry to you. I know that it is sometimes a very difficult task to manage what comes through the inbox at SAPRA. So kudos to the team. Keep it up. And let's just keep the dialogue going because, you know, our intention is to get this right and to make it easier for everybody. Okay. All right, guys. So you've got your emails there, which is fantastic. Anything further for Elsabe? All right. I think you're off the hook, my dear. And I'm sure you've had your head into Poppy for like weeks. It must be exhausting.
Deal with Poppy, but I cannot deal with our beloved healthcare professionals. Some of them not knowing the difference between an email address and a web address. You know, that type of, somebody saying to me, I do not know how to copy and paste. Can you help me, please?
Okay, you've seen it all.
That just gets me.
Well, Elsabe, with SAMED's permission, we'll be calling on you to maybe just cast your eyes over what we are going to submit and maybe give us some time, maybe with your team. It doesn't have to be with you. I know you've got some able people behind you. Just to make sure that we do give us the very best opportunity to put in cogent results. Comments. I see. Is there any SAPRA platform that we can submit our compliments for employees? Oh, that's a good one. Thanks, Loshni. I think we should put that forward. Yeah. All right. And I see there's a rating for today's forum, so you can submit your vote now. And I think that's probably the end. We've exhausted our questions. Thank you very much for making the time, everybody, and especially to Elsabe, our learned colleague, for your insights. I know I took a lot of notes. Really appreciate your time, and good luck, everybody. Let's see what we get in terms of comments. Send them through, and we'll collate everything and send it as a submission from the industry. So this is your chair signing off, and enjoy the rest of your day. Keep safe.